Busyness by itself is not speed. It just looks like speed. You need the alignment.
You're just spinning your wheels. You're getting exactly nowhere. All you're doing is just burning rubber.
But at the end of the day, someone has to say no. The toxic niceness is what's killing people. And so, yeah, it takes all of the above.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
I'm Chris Saad.
I'm Keith Lucas.
We all know that speed is at the heart of startup success, but why is that exactly? More importantly, how do you know and make sure that your startup is built for speed from the very beginning? Well, we have a special treat for you. Today's guest has written a whole book on the topic. Why should you care about what he thinks? Let's just say if you are around kids at all, you'll be extremely familiar with the juggernaut business he helped build as its product and engineering leader. Who is it? We'll tell you right after the break. Listen up. I know a lot of you use dev agencies to help build your product. Problem is, a lot of those agencies suck. I've been looking for one I can really endorse, and I finally found one. Warp Development are the powerhouse behind countless successful startups and enterprises for over 22 years. They have 100+ experts who don't just code, they solve business problems. From custom software to AI consulting, Warp delivers results that move your business forward. And they're in your time zone. They have offices in Australia, the United States, and South Africa, so you get local support with global expertise. Are you ready to build something that matters? Visit warpdevelopment.com, that's WARP development.com, and mention the Startup Podcast for a free consultation. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by .tech domains. One thing about starting your startup that should be easy but isn't is naming it. Why is it so hard? Because all the good .com domain names are taken. So you end up doing something silly like misspelling it or adding random prefixes or suffixes. No more. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so you should make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. Head to get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy to grab your .tech domain today. That's www.get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast. Today's guest, Keith Lucas, led product and engineering at Roblox, the titanic social platform for user-created games and virtual experiences. They're currently generating about $6 billion in annual revenue. Wow. And Keith was absolutely instrumental in getting them there, helping scale their infrastructure, product offerings, team, and business. Keith was also COO of Instrumental, a company using AI to transform hardware manufacturing. He now advises startups and has written a book. It's called Impact: How to Inspire, Align, and Amplify Innovative Teams. All of which, of course, makes Keith the perfect person to teach us about how to build speed into your startup. Keith, welcome to the Startup Podcast.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so we talk about speed a lot, and it's nearly a truism that speed is critical to startup success, but why does it actually matter? What's so important about it?
The first thing is at the high level is that teams that move faster tend to have higher impact and greater success. And we have a couple of examples of this. Like, first of all, to get to product market fit, the teams that move faster towards product market fit, that experiment faster, that iterate faster, that incorporate learning faster, they are more successful. We also see over and over again how the small startup can disrupt the giant company through agility and speed of delivery. And we're seeing that right now in AI. There's other examples. I'll give one more. One of my favorites is Tony Robbins, who talked about when he learned how to be a salesperson. He went on 10 times the number of sales calls as everyone else, and in 1 year amassed 10 years of experience to everyone's 1, and was then able to outperform them. So for me, it just comes down to that basic thing, that teams that move faster tend to have more success and more impact.
I've heard it described as having shots on goal and the rate of learning. The reality is startups are not businesses, they're learning machines. It's something Yaniv and I have talked about many, many times on the show. And the rate of learning and the rate of experimentation and the rate of trials, of experiments, is what accelerates your learning. And this is a pattern that's been noticed, right? It's been noticed by all the smart money. And so a lot of even raising capital is not just about the success that speed gives you, but about the narrative that speed and momentum also supports when you're raising money. So it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the pattern matching investors are looking for is how fast did these guys execute, how short is the story, and how much have they achieved during that time. So it's good fundraising practice, and it's good fundraising practice because they've noticed that the best teams execute this way.
Yeah, I actually think it's even more than shots on goal. It's about compounding, right? And compounding is an exponential process, right? So these things build on each other. And imagine if instead of getting 10 sequential attempts of learning, 10 iterations of learning in, you can get 20. You get far more than double the progress, right? Because you have this exponential. And, as we know with exponentials, all of the value comes right at the end, right? That's when the curve goes vertical. And so the quicker you iterate, the faster you move, the quicker you get to that point of that massive hockey stick of learning, and then hopefully that hockey stick in the business as well.
One of the things that when I advise companies that comes up often is their cadence of sprints or planning cadences and all of this. And I talk about how many at-bats do you want. So it's how many of those shots on goal. And do you have a planning cycle that allows you to have 3 releases in the next 2 months, or do you go for releases every day?
Speed is easy to talk about. It's hard to do. And oftentimes when you talk to companies about accelerating their speed, there's usually a kind of a cultural resistance to it, or there's a kind of a theater around it, or there's a toxic and unhealthy version of it that's implemented that you might actually call thrash rather than speed. So maybe it's worth going through a few of these bad examples and kind of dissecting them, unpacking them, explaining why they're anti-patterns. So, the first thing you often hear is, well, everyone's really busy, Keith, and we're moving pretty fast. What more would you have us do? Why might that one be, a bit of a red herring?
I think it's a red herring if you then ask 10 people, what are you busy about? And they all have different answers. And it's not answers that make sense in a bigger scheme. It's just they all have different answers. So busyness by itself is not speed. It just looks like speed. You need the alignment.
Alignment is the key word. Yeah, we've had at least 1, maybe 2 episodes all about alignment on the show, and the metaphor we've used is, imagine you have a giant boulder, and people, you got ropes lashed around it, and you've got this team of really strong, really awesome people, and they're all pulling in different directions. And so they're all moving faster, in this case, doing their bit, but they're all on different vectors. And so the speed is not constructive. It's actually literally destructive. It's literally working against itself. And they're not necessarily working on the right things.
With these red herrings, Keith, like what I see a lot of the time is that founders confuse the expenditure of energy with velocity, right? They get frustrated that things aren't happening fast enough, that they're not getting results hard enough. And they push themselves and then ultimately their whole team to do more, right? So they're using it as a proxy, that level of activity, busyness, getting things done, and so on, as a proxy for speed. But what they don't do is stop and look around and see that all of this activity, all of this busyness isn't actually moving them in the direction that they're trying to go. That's where the frustration builds up. And often if they don't have that awareness, they think the solution is just to work even harder. And that's how companies can start to burn out.
I think you're right about the burnout. I also think this is very common. This is probably one of the most common things, is the busy work. I think it comes from not having a clear definition of what speed is. And if you have a clear definition of what speed is, then it's easier to point out the red herrings.
Yeah, and the definition might be something like the rate of strategic value delivery to users, right? So it is the cadence and the time frame of strategic value. Strategic value means you're not just doing anything for anyone at any time. It's value that is aligned against a trajectory that you're trying to traverse, and it is the delivery of that value to users. So it's not busy work internally, it's not partnerships, it's not protecting IP or academic programs, it's delivery of value to your end users. So maybe that's a good definition for us to play with.
We've talked before about the work of the behavioral economists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, Nobel Prize winners, and all of the cognitive fallacies and biases that they discovered, right? And the one that I'm thinking about here is called the substitution heuristic, right? Which is where you substitute thinking about something that is difficult with something that is easier without even realizing that you're doing it. And I think that's what's happening here. That these red herrings, right, Keith, are like, Oh, okay. Like figuring out how to actually move fast is difficult. So we are substituting busyness. We are substituting working hard. We are substituting like making a lot of rapid decisions, but without them being coherent, without them compounding on each other. And what you end up is this frenetic activity that when you're zoomed in looks a lot like progress, but when you zoom out, you see that you're not actually getting anywhere.
I think that's right. What is interesting about what you're saying is I think why are people doing that? They're not actually substituting for what is harder. They're substituting for what they think is harder because they shouldn't even be doing that other thing anyway. And here, what I mean by that is you don't say, oh, I can either be really busy or I can figure out in my room what I need to do next and over the next 5 years. No, you need to start experimenting. And so actually the work of experimentation is less work than the busyness. You don't have to figure everything out in advance. That's the whole point of iterating.
They're often also not just substituting for necessarily what is easier, but they're substituting for what they know. There are people who are very, very good at doing certain things, right? And they will often default to doing that thing because it feels comfortable, or it feels like, if you're a hammer, everything is a nail. Or they'll substitute for sugar highs, where it's like, it feels like if we could just, tactically solve this thing quickly rather than solving it permanently, or like, putting it to bed. Those also tend to be substitutions that are the wrong kind of substitution.
So yeah, to be clear, when we talk about this sort of doing something easier, it's something that's easier to think about, not something that takes less effort altogether, right? It's a cognitive laziness. And of course, the famous book is called Thinking Fast and Slow, right? And so the thing is, you actually have to slow down and come up with a plan, or otherwise you're just going to be spinning your wheels. Which brings me to this analogy that you've introduced me to, Keith, that you came up with, that I think is just so perfect, right? And we're talking about spinning wheels. And maybe we can go a little bit geeky for a moment, and you can tell us about the actual mechanics about how a wheel propels a vehicle forward and actually drives to speed, and how that applies to speed in your startup.
Yeah, it's the wheel analogy is my past coming back to haunt me over and over again. So what makes a wheel move? There is really two fundamental reasons why a wheel rolls. One is you apply a force in the direction that you want it to roll. And the other one is on the ground, there is, at the point between the wheel and the ground, there's static friction. And without that friction, the wheel would actually slide, which requires even more energy to move the wheel. So the static friction where it rolls is actually the most efficient way of moving a wheel forward. In real world, you also have drag on the wheel. And that's all of the air forces on the wheel that are holding it back. And so for me, this is a really good analogy because of the static friction. And what I mean by that is, for a lot of people, you can intuitively get at, oh, I apply force and then I'm going to be held back. But there's certain kinds of force or friction that are healthy. And we often think about all friction as a taboo. And what you're really trying to do is get everyone pushing in roughly the same direction, provide enough friction so people stay in that direction unless you learn otherwise, and then do everything you can to eliminate all other friction. And so I think it's a useful model.
I think particularly in describing the failure mode, right? And people, like I said, they use this analogy, this phrase, spinning your wheels. And all of these red herrings, Keith, they feel to me like the spinning of wheels, right? They're like, if I just apply more force, if I apply more drive, then I will move faster. But no, if you don't have the static friction because you got bald tires or whatever it is, then you go exactly nowhere. You're just spinning your wheels, you're getting exactly nowhere. All you're doing is just burning rubber.
The other thing that speed is not is doing more things, right, Keith? So
Yes.
lately I've been obsessed with this analogy of if you have a bottle of water and you're trying to water 2 plants or 3 plants, and they're all going to sort of wilt. They're not going to thrive. But if you only have one plant, that plant has a chance to survive and thrive. The analogy we've used on the show before is the analogy of a hunter chasing two rabbits. And if they go in two different directions, you can't just split the difference and go down the middle. And you certainly can't catch both of them, right? You've got to choose. And so oftentimes speed is confused with the idea of like, we've just got to do more things. The counterintuitive reality is actually you've got to do fewer things, fewer focus areas, so that you can accelerate the rate of that strategic delivery of value to users. And so, yeah, it's a very, very important that this busy work is often because people are misaligned and or they're working on 2 or 3 or 5 different things instead of the one thing.
So I think all of these analogies, and I have mine and you have yours, they're all really helpful. But what I find when talking to startups, people intellectually get this, but they don't internalize it. It's only when you are involved in a failure, when you saw everyone going crazy in every direction, and you realize why. But there's reasons why focus and sort of channeled effort really matters, and why it's in almost every great book on startups, the need for speed and focus. Ultimately, and I think this is becoming more true, you need to differentiate. And so if you don't focus, you can't differentiate as much, as quickly as other people. And then you just lose in the marketplace.
In my experience, there's a few reasons why they can't internalize and operationalize this. There are, I suspect, many, many reasons, but the 4 that come to mind right now is fear. They're hedging, right? They're afraid they're going to make the wrong choice, and so they're trying to maintain optionality. Something, again, we've talked about a lot on the show. There's often a lack of vision, so they don't know what they're running toward, or there's a lack of connective tissue between vision and tactics, so they don't know how the details inside which they're operating. And then the last 2 is there's a lack of leadership that's rallying and helping to focus the team around, to dispel the fear and to set the vision. And then there's a lack of discipline, either from that leader or leaders or the team, where they are, I often say to my teams, I can set up this, vision, this leadership, this structure, these ideas, but until and unless each and every one of you are saying in a respectful, collegial, disciplined, principled way, no to colleagues, no to distraction, no to the wrong kind of customer, no, then it's all for nothing. We also had an episode on this, Yaniv. Remember, I came in one day and I was like really heated about like, man, we've had all of these episodes about all this stuff, but at the end of the day, someone has to say no. They have to say no to each other. The toxic niceness is what's killing people. And so, yeah, it takes all of the above.
So Keith, let's dial into this static friction, right? The static friction is the fat tires on your car. Chris is a car guy; he gets it. And let's get tactical, right? What does it look like to fit fat tires onto your startup so you can go fast? What are the building blocks here? And this really gets into what you speak to in your book, Impact.
Almost everything in my book can be boiled down into like a couple of things that relate to speed. One is you have to hire, retain, and develop for speed. The people that you have on your team and you retain on your team are people who have to be able to focus. They have to be able to align around ideas. They have to be able to act with urgency. And they have to do the same thing and expect the same thing in their peers. So that's just fundamental, is that team composition. The other one, a lot of the complexity in the book can be boiled down to 3 questions. And I ask them over and over again. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how do we know we're making progress? And they're really simple, but they really cover a lot of ground, and they are a great starting point. They're my first starting point when taking over a team or walking into a situation and trying to understand how do we move fast.
Well, let's dial into that first one a little bit, Keith, and feel free to use maybe some examples from Roblox or your other work. You talked about hiring a team for speed. That is the team that moves fast and that you hire and you teach that. But what does that actually look like in practice? How do you build speed into the culture of a team?
I think number one is who's on the team. And so in my book, I like to call these mission athletes. And what that means is they're people who are dedicated to mission. They believe in it. So it can inspire and drive them and fuel resiliency. They are constantly improving their capacity and the collective capacity of the team. They're seeking mastery like athletes, and they take feedback like athletes. And there's a handful of other things these people do. And so you can recruit for it, you can develop it and promote for it, and then you have to exit people who are unwilling or unable to do those things. A lot of it comes down to having values and living by the values, and having the values dictate hiring, promotions, and exits. And so the three shortcut values I share in the book, I share performance values, I talk a lot about values, but the three, I think, shortcuts, the simplest thing is focus, urgency, and team health. And what I mean by team health, is the team in a creative position? Are they distracted, or do they have the space to create? And is the team fully composed of people who are contributing?
I love everything you said there, Keith. And there's a couple of truisms in there that I want to come back to. You mentioned the phrase just at the end here, fully composed. A couple of bad apples can really corrupt your culture, and it brings me to a number of axioms that are so commonplace in Silicon Valley, especially, that they seem almost trivial or benign to repeat them or to say them. They seem like platitudes, where they're just right. And so the first one I want to touch on, you mentioned it, alluded to it, was hire slow, fire fast. And it's one of those platitudes everyone talks about. It's really hard to do because as a human being, you just need help and you just sort of hire whoever's around. And as a human being, you don't want to fire people. You don't want to have hard conversations. And so everyone knows it. Almost nobody follows it well enough. The other cliche almost in Silicon Valley is bias towards action. The idea is to not talk about it and plan for it, get things done. Obviously strategic things that are aligned. There's another cultural aspect that is also a truism, which is escalate early and often, especially in larger companies where you get stuck in local bottlenecks. You need to escalate up the org. Of course, disagree and commit is like, there are these two-door options that people spend forever arguing about. And in my experience, a lot of what happens is people disagree and just keep disagreeing, or they commit, but it's a pretend commit, and they revert to the mean.
I had a co-founder who called that dinosaur arms, like little T-Rex arms. It was like, you commit and you're like, oh, I'm trying so hard, I can't really quite help as much as I expected to.
Yeah, or it's like, yeah, I totally agree with what you said. But and then in there, Bill Clinton is like, well, depends on your definition of what is.
Yeah.
My definition of is we're doing this. Like, let's just fucking do it. And then the final thing is you need to reward bold action. Oftentimes people are afraid for their jobs, or they're afraid to be wrong, or what have you. And you need to, encourage people to just go take big, bold steps, rip Band-Aids off, go do things that are scary. Keith, you also mentioned living the values. I've recently been involved in a values redesign again. It's really, you said you have to live the values, and that's really important. I just want to make a very fine point on that. It's not enough to write them down. It's not enough to socialize them at the all hands. You have to bake them into the hiring notes. People write notes against the values. How does this candidate fit our values? You need to bake them into your everyday BAU processes. So if you're writing, let's say, a PRD, how does this product or iteration fit our values? And then you need to write it into your performance reviews and performance rubrics and reviews. And so you performance review each other through the lens of the values. And that's what it means to really, really have values and really embed them in the company.
One of the things I talk about in the book is this idea, and it came to me after becoming an advisor. You have codified culture, and then you have realized culture.
Yes.
And the only thing that matters is realized culture. Codified culture does not matter. And the bigger the gap, the more dysfunctional you are as a team, and probably the less leadership skill the leaders have. So realized culture is even things like, you can talk about moving fast all day, and then if everyone's stuck in meetings all day and no one likes the meetings and no one thinks the meetings are productive, well, then you don't seem like a team that moves very fast. And so it is the big things and the little things. It's everything you do, don't do, or allow to be done that defines realized culture. And that's what I mean by living the values. And everything else matters, of course, but if it affects who gets hired, who gets promoted, and who gets asked to leave, then those values are lived.
Yeah, so I think an interesting question then, Keith, and then, trying to get practical around this is, I think we all completely agree that it's the realized values that are the ones that matter. But I think maybe there is a role for codified values. And my question is, how do you make sure that when you're hiring, when you're managing for performance, when you're rewarding people, all of these things, that it is your realized values, it's that the values that you actually care about, that all of your actions are aligned with that. And especially as a team grows, how do you make sure that you continue to live the values that actually matter?
The gap between codified and realized values is not intentional, and I don't think people know it's there, or they don't design it to be there. So whenever you're doing explicit things, people are operating against their codified values. It's the things that they're not aware of that define the realized values. So I have an example I really like, which is a individual contributor. I was working at a company one time as a part-time executive, and an individual contributor came to me and said, "Hey, I haven't gotten a raise in 2 years." And I asked around, and I'm like, "Hey, tell me about this person." And they're like, "She's amazing. We can't lose her. She's amazing." And I'm like, "Well, why hasn't she gotten a raise?" She's a little concerned and not sure she's going to be here next year. And I was told that she had hit the hiring band limit for her level. And at this point, this is when you palm your face or more. And what I explained was, you just taught this person that performance is less important than rules. That's your culture. And that's a great example of how your realized culture can come in without you meaning to.
So, I'd love to drill down on that some more, Keith. And if you're able to reflect on your experiences, especially at Roblox, which has obviously been incredibly successful, when you start to see the realized culture drifting from the codified or the idealized culture that you want, what are some things you can do to keep it where you want it, to stop it from drifting in this way, especially as you're growing and as you're hitting that success?
So I think you can do a number of things. So one of the things is that your values do evolve over time, and it does take, I don't want to say work to imply enormous amounts of work, but it takes care to cultivate values as you move forward in time, because what works for 5 people who know each other is maybe confusing or potentially off-putting to people who are learning from other people. So one is you have to keep cultivating your values to be relevant to the group that is there. The other one is to, in a group setting, constantly point out positive versions of values, like who is living the values. I call these exemplars, just who is living the values. And this is something that we did at Roblox. We pointed this out often. Then in more private settings is when you are talking to people about their performance, about a miss, or when you're talking to a team about a collective miss, talk about the values. This is what we did at Roblox. I would say, just a little for context, when I joined Roblox in 2008, I don't remember if we had values. In fact, I think we just had a close group of people who knew how to work together. Dave developed values about a year after that, around that time. And at first, what they were more guideposts. They were not turbocharging anything. They were just more, and we were kind of yeah, these make sense. We should think about them. But then eventually, about a few years later, as the team was growing, he took another take at them, and he really led an effort to make sure that they were institutionalized, that they were part of reviews, they were part of assessments, they were part of the hiring process, they were part of feedback, they were part of celebrations. And suddenly, everything worked a lot better. Things were easier, we had shared knowledge, and when a new person walked in who was a hiring mistake, you knew, everyone in the room knew it pretty quickly, and you knew why. It was because of our values.
Yeah, I was working on values recently with somebody, and we had both come from very values-oriented companies that did a very, very good job of this. Separate, different companies, but the same kind of focus on it. And I remember saying to her, you can tell when an Uber person walks in the room, or you can tell before you meet somebody from Uber what they're going to be like, especially early Uber. And we really lived the values, and everybody there was sort of very much of the same ilk. And I was saying I still remember 4 or 5 or 6 of the values, even though there was actually too many. There was like 10 or 12 of these things. Big bold bets and let builders build and make magic and all this sort of stuff. It was really, really very well ingrained. And we said it's almost like a cult. And this cult of shared experience and shared intent and shared values. And I don't say that in a pejorative way. I think it's very, very useful to doing big, bold things. So if you're trying to do something disruptive, and if you're at any scale, even maybe 3 or 4 people, 5 people, you need to be thinking about this and institutionalizing it and living to it. Yeah, it's very, very important. And just to connect it back to the topic, it's about alignment of values, alignment of thinking, and the values themselves should inculcate the notion of speed being an important value.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Just take values, as you're saying, just take values. If you have clear values, you have something that everyone can align to. Everyone works more effectively and efficiently together, and that results in moving faster. If in addition, some of those values are urgency, iterate, in one way or another. Now you're driving speed on 2 levels, both with the values themselves and the fact that you're aligning as a team on those values. One other thing I'll add, the original title of the book was Belief and Impact. And it was because I think teams really need to come together around a lot of shared belief. Belief in purpose, belief in values, belief in mission, belief in the audience they're serving, belief in the way they operate together, and then they need to have impact, or it doesn't matter.
I've written a couple of little mini ebooks on the subject of becoming a product-led org. And one of them has this like logic chain. It's maybe 20 steps where scale is the goal. And that requires growth, and growth requires, standardization, and standardization requires focus. And all the way at the beginning of the logic chain is faith, faith and vision. And as a secular, as an atheist, I sort of arrived at that, and I was like, oh shit.
Startups are your religion, Chris.
Yeah.
Startups are my religion. It requires faith. Yes.
All the best .coms are taken or crazily overpriced, so you settle on a workaround domain for your website. Don't compromise. Get a clean, sharp .tech domain that instantly says, this is a tech startup. Grab yours at get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast or via domain registrars like GoDaddy. Looking for a tech partner to scale your business? Here's one I can personally endorse, Warp Development. With 22 years of experience and 100 plus experts, they deliver custom software and AI solutions that drive results. Visit warpdevelopment.com and mention the Startup Podcast for a free consultation. Let's dive in a little bit more into culture, Keith, and maybe the framework in your book. It's in the title, right? Inspire, align, and amplify, right? So we've talked about values. We've talked about the importance of culture, that's effectively the fat tires. That is what gets you to speed. So talk about inspire, align, and amplify, and what you mean by those things, and how to put them into practice.
Let's talk about each one. So let's talk about inspiring. And normally when we hear people talk about being inspirational, they think of a good orator. And when you look at some of the really great leaders in tech, they are pretty good orators. They can project vision. But it's not just that inspiration. The inspiration is on a couple of levels. There's a collective and an individual level. The collective level is, are you inspired by the purpose? Are you inspired by how the company operates? Are you inspired by the audience you serve? And all of that. So there's like a collective piece, and that's where you can start with the mission and vision. Are those inspiring? That can bring out drive. It can bring out resilience. You can go to values where they're like a sorting mechanism also, where people can look at those values and say, I want to be part of that team. That's a team I want to be. I'm excited to be part of that team. There is the inspiration of autonomy and mastery. And these are things Daniel Pink talks about in Drive. If I go somewhere and I have some level of autonomy, then I'm excited that I can have personal impact. And if I'm growing, I think growing is something that everyone wants to do, particularly it really goes hand in hand with startups. Then that's inspiring. On the individual level, I'll throw out one thing that I do talk a lot, or I not talk directly about in the book, and I have a personal story if you want to get into it, but it's connecting the role and the mission with the individual's purpose. And I think this is a really important part of inspiration, is you can be inspired by the place, but you need to feel that personal inspiration to bring out your best. So the story is very personal to me, and it's a really great example of aligning my purpose with the purpose that was needed for my job and the team. This was at Roblox. I was growing in my number of direct reports and the scope I had and the responsibilities I had. Dave and I always really aligned on so many things, and he showed a lot of faith and trust in me. But I started hitting a wall, and the wall was like, I realize now is fairly common, but also there was elements of my own making. And that was, in order to get more out of the team, I started just pushing harder and harder and harder. This was my version of speed back then. It was how hard could I personally push people, demand of them, and it was uncomfortable for people. So we found me a coach, or Dave found me a coach, and what the coach did is really try to figure out what I really wanted in life and how I operated. And what he learned and helped me realize is that for me personally, achievement is very high. So not like public recognition, but just like phenomenal get stuff done energy. The thing I really wanted in life was to be a good leader. I really wanted to help Roblox. I really wanted to become a good leader. And he helped me understand that the way I was operating was getting in my own way. And that by aligning that what I wanted in life with what I needed to do for the company, the mission, the team, suddenly I was unlocked. And it was more than any other tactical BS you hear about, like, oh, you're about to get angry, so please count to 5, or like take a step back or go away and come back. I was still angry. So but when I realized that, I'm getting in my own way of the thing I want most. This company can help me get there. This role can help me get there. He unlocked a lot, and I went on to many more years at Roblox of being very effective, and heard from people that I was a different leader after that. It's when I think I became more of a systematic leader.
That's really, really awesome, Keith. And yeah, I've had a few of those moments where you have these mindset shifts, these paradigm shifts that someone somewhere can just say like almost one phrase or ask you a question, and you're like, oh my, I had never internalized that before, and it shake your world.
So on alignment, a lot of the alignment is really at the collective level. There is personal alignment for sure, and that's the values. But step one is, do you have things to align to? And one of the things I developed at Roblox was something I called the Cascade. And it was a cascade from vision to mission to values to strategy, goals, and metrics. It's not rocket science, but it was just my way of communicating. And the first few, mission, vision, and values, are often top down, and people don't mind that they're top down, but the strategy, goals, and metrics are where you start getting very collaborative. You need all of that to align. And if you have multiple teams working in parallel, they each need one of those cascades, and that needs to map up to the macro overall team cascade.
I was going to say the cascade is not just one mission, vision, values, and numbers. It is this a fractal where the executive team defines one at the very top, and then each group, like large department, needs to define one within the context of that vision, mission, and then each squad or subgroup or even project needs to define theirs in the context of the one that is above them in the abstraction.
So this is 100% what I did at this is like, I don't know where I got it from, I'm sure somewhere, but I just started doing this at Roblox in like 2008 or 9, and we just started breaking up into teams, and I was like, we all need this. So alignment is really about that. The one thing I'd say about the cascading cascades, or the fractal, I like the fractal, that's good, is this is where, if you are not careful and you really need to have a lightweight stack, like cascade, this is where you do slow things down. If you don't allow slop in everyone's cascade, meaning, oh yeah, like let's do some planning. We're all like aligned. And then it's like, oh, hey, we're over here. We learned something. Our cascade is not quite the same anymore. What we're trying to do is a little different. Oh, okay, everybody, we all got to replan everyone again. No, you can't do that. It's like tax loss harvesting. You have to do it like once in a while. So like, or you overdo it. So that's just one word of caution that I learned through like not doing it well, is this is where you introduce bureaucracy and slowness, unless by intent you say that whole thing has to be lightweight and easy to change.
This is really, really important, Keith, because the pushback you get on this takes us all the way back to the beginning, where I've had executives say to me, no, you don't understand, Chris, this is academic and everyone is super busy and everyone already knows what they're doing. Everyone's already aligned. What is the point of all of these documents? And who is the audience for these documents? And we've already made too many documents and you're asking for, too much bureaucracy. And I'm like, no, everyone isn't aligned. That alignment is a mirage. Everyone is busy doing busy work as a result of that. And the audience for these documents is everyone, the people in the department, as well as the people around them and the people above them. And this is not a lot of documents. This is fewer documents, because what's usually happening is everybody's creating like temporary ephemeral documents for the meeting they're having, instead of one canonical document and plan for all their thoughts and processes moving forward. There's so many red herrings or psychological barriers to making these things. And they assume they're going to be difficult and bureaucratic, where they just need to be lightweight and clear. And canonical. People go back to them versus making more of them.
It's funny, actually, sticking with the analogy of wheels, I've seen this great cartoon that does the rounds from time to time, where it's a bunch of cavemen pushing a cart with a square wheel. And there's another caveman holding a sketch of a circular wheel. And the first caveman says to the second one, sorry, too busy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right, we're adding this to our stable of metaphors, Yaniv. We got the two rabbits, we got the caveman with the square wheel. If someone needs to go back through our episodes and like write down these really vivid analogies that we've used or we've come up with.
It's good to always have fresh ones. It's good to keep it fresh. But yeah, I think this is really fascinating. And also, actually, maybe it's a good time to incorporate this concept of, you mentioned there are three forces acting on a wheel, right? There is drive, there is static friction, which is what allows you to move forward quickly, and there is drag, which slows you down. And in implementing these tools for alignment and so on, and for inspiration, You want to make sure that you are creating static friction, that you're getting those nice fat tires. But the risk is if you overdo it or if you do it the wrong way, then you can actually introduce drag. And there's a certain, I guess, art to that, right? This is where people start to complain, I guess, about bureaucracy and about things slowing down, is because your processes or your structures that you have introduced to provide static friction, you've overdone it and they shift over into drag.
And I think, by the way, you asked earlier about Roblox. What I would say that Dave and also Eric Castle, one of the earliest member of Roblox, Dave's right hand in so many ways. What the three of us had in common, and we worked together at Dave's first company, is that if anyone said the word bureaucracy, if anyone said the word this is BS, and there was actually, the first employee was well known for saying that no matter what was going on. But we moved fast. So, it was intuitive. If I heard that, I would immediately want to know why. Was it something I was doing? I was like, well, then let's throw out what we're doing and come up with a way to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So what I always would stick to is, we need to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we know we're making progress. We need to know that what we're doing aligns with what everyone else is doing in some way. So how do we do that more effectively? Yeah. But yeah, we really had an allergic reaction to any whiff of bureaucracy whenever we heard it. And I think that was part of why we were able to keep somewhat of a lid on it for a while.
Bureaucracy is simply unnecessary structure, unnecessary process. But not all process or structure is unnecessary. It is simply overbuilt process and structure. And so it's sort of like people who say, throw out all the meetings. No, throw out the bad meetings, throw out badly run meetings, but you need meetings. These sort of extreme, these are like diets or something. You need to have balance in your life. And there needs to be some enough structure to orchestrate the organism of the business.
You can think about your culture as a product. And once you do that, then you can bring a lot more ideas or intuition to it, meaning, the best products pull. They don't require push. And the best products naturally engage the audience. And so there's a lot of intuition you can bring to culture and bureaucracy. A good example using the product analogy is we've all used products that become amazingly feature bloated. They're very complicated. You don't understand what's going on, and then I'm looking at it now. Canva comes out and you're like, oh, all right, I'll use that. So your culture can be like that, where you've just overbuilt.
Yaniv and I often talk on the show about building the thing that builds the thing. And as you scale up, we have episodes about becoming a scale up. And as a CEO and as leaders in the business, you need to switch from building the thing to building the thing that builds the thing. And doing that with just as much love, craft, taste, intuition, and judgment as you were spending on the other stuff. And it's a hard switch to make, a hard mindset shift. Because we're all too busy using the square wheel.
Did you want to talk briefly about Amplify?
Yeah, so Amplify comes from a lot of the other elements I've described already. When you inspire, you can amplify. But a lot of the amplification is around, I think of it as unlocking people. And so let's talk about collective and individual. So when you think about the collective, one way to amplify a team collectively is to actually make sure there's space for the team to flow. And I mean flow in the flow sense, like you are having like an athlete will experience a flow state and be able to really work. I think there's flow at the micro level, like, hey, I get too many interruptions during the day, so I never concentrated on anything. To macro, meaning, and this is where I think you can amplify the team, is, and it also relates to the drag that you can impose if you don't. If you are changing direction, not by learning, but by whim, and then people never have the chance to complete anything. And then, and I think startups are built by what they complete, not attempt. And so flow is an important amplifier. I think being concrete is an important amplifier. But really, it's at the individual level that amplification really comes alive, I think, is where I think it really does a lot. You hire for success. That's not just a platitude. I have an example of the very first person I hired at Roblox. I hired because it struck me that we would be lucky to hire her for reasons A, B, and C. That's hiring for success. You coach for growth. Everyone has to have a growth mindset, and you have to coach for growth. Another one is creating opportunities. And so this is where I am in the camp of trying to have more dynamic organizations, and not on a whim and not for no reason at all. I do get that you want to build up expertise in something, and that means staying in an area, so you can get better at it. But I really think if you don't have a dynamic org, then the same people have the opportunity to lead over and over and over again. And so you want to create opportunity. You want to understand mindsets like things that hold people back, whether it's imposter syndrome or other things. And then you want to dial in success. And that's what the story I told before about my coach, he dialed in my success, and that really amplified me.
This is so important. And what it comes to mind as you were talking is this idea of removing the bottlenecks for speed as well. And I will sometimes go through an exercise with teams I'm advising around, asking the question, what is the top things that are slowing us down? Doing a survey, cataloging all those things, stack ranking them, stack ranking them, and then committing as a leader in the team to solve the top 5 or top 10 of those things. And I mean, like, solve them, not spend, 10 months talking about them. Solve them fast. And, there's another cliche in Silicon Valley, which is a service leadership. You're there to solve problems and supercharge your team. And one of the best ways is to explicitly look for things that are slowing them down and run around the company or run around the structure of the business and get them out of the way so the team can go faster.
I completely agree. Someone asked me literally this week, how do I ensure that the team knows I'm valuable to them? And I was like, well, I would start by solving their problems. Like, just figure out what are they trying to do every day what are they getting frustrated about, and just work on those things. That's a great start. So I completely agree with you.
Okay, Keith, that's been an incredible walk through some of your experiences that you've also codified in your book about how to really build a startup and an organization for speed. So if folks here are listening, I'm sure they've gotten a huge amount out of it, but if there's one thought you could leave them with, one actionable thing that you feel that they should really take away from this, what would it be?
At the high level, it's to understand that it's doable. The high-performing companies, they don't just innovate, they build engines of innovation in the people they hire, retain and develop, and in the behaviors they cultivate. And it's totally doable. You just have to put your mind to it. It's not rocket science.
Keith, I love that so much. We talked about it in a sense about building the thing that builds the thing, but you just said it in such a much more poetic way. They don't just innovate, they build engines of innovation. Yeah. It's not an accident that they get to the front and they stay at the front. That is your ultimate innovation challenge. So many countries and companies talk about innovation. Innovate your own company. Innovate your own culture before you can innovate, the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, folks, you should all go and read Keith's book. It is coming out very shortly. Keith, can you tell everybody again the title of the book and when it will be available?
Yeah, the book is called Impact: How to Inspire, Align, and Amplify Innovative Teams. It comes out on August 19th.
Available where all good books are sold, Keith?
Yeah, it is available where all good books are sold. And you can go to my website, keithvlucas.com, and learn a whole lot more.
Put in a pre-order. I think that gets you on the bestseller lists, right, Keith?
Yeah, no, I mean, the way I've learned how books work, pre-orders and reviews are how you get up there.
That's right. So if you got something out of this episode from Keith, which I'm sure you have, consider putting in a pre-order. Keith, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for giving your time to us today and to all the listeners. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed meeting you both. This has been really great. Thank you.
And Chris, I know you advise companies on supercharging their speed. So if people want to work with you and get that speed built into their company, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can learn more about what I do over at chrissard.com/advisory and sign up to my newsletter at chrissard.com/newsletter. How about you, Yaniv?
I am on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place. I've just started my new startup venture, so I will probably be doing a bit of building in public there. So yet another reason to connect with me on LinkedIn. Tell me you come from the Startup Podcast. I will accept your request and you can follow my journey there.
I'm excited to learn more about it. All right, Yaniv, that's another pod.
All right, see you, mate. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by .tech domains. Naming your startup should be easy, but it isn't because all the good .com names are taken or wildly overpriced. No more. You don't have to compromise. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. How do you do that? Head to www.get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy and grab your .tech domain today. Get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast so they know you came from us. This episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Warp Development. I know a lot of you rely on dev agencies to help build your product. Problem is, a lot of these agencies suck. Ask me how I know. I've been looking for one that I can really endorse, and I have finally found one. Warp Development are the powerhouse behind countless successful startups and enterprises for over 22 years. They have over 100 experts who don't just code, they solve business problems alongside you. From custom software to AI consulting, Warp Development delivers results that move your business forward. And they're in your time zone. They have offices in Australia, the United States, and South Africa, so you get local support with global expertise. Are you ready to build something that matters? Visit warpdevelopment.com. That's WARP development.com and mention the Startup Podcast for a free consultation.